She was never meant to be the kind of woman someone like him would choose, and he was never supposed to look at her that way. But one conversation changed everything. One glance broke every rule, and one secret almost destroyed the love neither of them could admit. Because what really happened between Mary and Tom was never shown the way it truly unfolded. It didn't begin like a love story, it began like silence pretending to be normal. Mary Bennet had always lived in the background of her own life. Observant, thoughtful, often overlooked, she didn't chase attention, she didn't expect to be chosen. And over time, she stopped believing she ever would be. Then Tom Haywood entered her world. At first, he was just another presence among many. Polite conversations, formal greetings, nothing special, nothing dangerous, at least that's what it looked like on the surface, but something subtle started to change. Tom didn't treat Mary like she was invisible, he didn't interrupt her thoughts, he didn't dismiss her silence. Instead, he noticed it as if it meant something worth understanding, and Mary noticed that he noticed. That was the first shift, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet awareness building between two people who were never supposed to pay attention to each other. Days passed like that. Simple interactions, controlled emotions, carefully chosen words, but underneath it all, something unspoken was growing, something neither of them had language for yet. Mary began to think about him when he wasn't there, not in a way she understood at first, just fragments. His tone, his focus, the way he seemed tired of pretending to be someone else. And Tom, he started staying longer in rooms where she was present. Not because he had to, because leaving felt slightly more difficult each time. Still, nothing was admitted, nothing was risked. Until the moment that changed everything, it happened without warning. In a conversation that was meant to be simple, light, forgettable. But Mary said something that was too honest, too sharp, too real for polite company, and instead of correcting her or dismissing her, Tom listened. Really listened. That was the moment everything shifted again. Because Mary wasn't used to being listened to like that, not studied, not judged, just understood. And in that silence between them, something dangerous formed. A connection that neither of them had planned, and neither of them knew how to stop. From that day on, their conversations changed. Still controlled on the surface, but underneath, every sentence carried weight. Every pause felt longer. Every glance felt heavier. Mary started questioning things she had always accepted, her place, her future, the idea that she was meant to remain unseen in her own story. And Tom, he started questioning himself why her words stayed in his mind longer than they should, why her presence felt different from anyone else's, why, when she looked at him directly, it felt like she was seeing something he had hidden even from himself. But fear was always there too, because neither of them could explain what was happening without risking everything. So they stayed careful, until careful stopped being enough. One moment, one unexpected exchange, made Tom say something he didn't plan to say, something honest, something almost too real. And Mary didn't laugh it off. She didn't escape it. She felt it. That was the problem, because once truth enters the space between two people, it doesn't leave quietly. It stays, it grows, and it starts demanding answers neither of them are ready to give. And just as Mary begins to realize that her life is no longer as simple as she once believed, Tom makes a decision that will either bring them closer than ever or destroy everything before it even has a chance to begin. But what he chooses next is something Mary never sees coming. And it will change everything she thought she understood about him. What was Tom really hiding behind his silence? And why did it all seem connected to Mary from the very beginning? After that shift, nothing between Mary and Tom could go back to how it was before. Even when they tried to act normal, it was no longer normal. Every meeting now carried a strange weight, as if something unspoken was standing right between them, waiting to be acknowledged. Mary told herself it was imagination. Tom told himself it was nothing. But both of them knew they were lying, because now, even silence felt meaningful. Mary began noticing the smallest things, the way Tom would pause before answering her, the way his attention never fully left the room when she was speaking, the way his voice softened just slightly when he said her name. These were not accidents anymore. They were patterns, and patterns always lead somewhere. Tom, on the other hand, was fighting a different battle. He had always been a man of control. Measured words, controlled expressions, careful distance. But around Mary, that control began to fracture in ways he couldn't explain. She made him lose focus, not because she tried to, but because she didn't. That was the difference. Mary didn't perform, she didn't pretend, she didn't adjust herself to fit expectations, and somehow that made everything around her feel more real than anything else he had known. Still, neither of them spoke about it directly. Instead, they hid behind conversation, poetry, books, casual remarks, observations about life that sounded harmless on the surface. But underneath every sentence, something else was happening. A second conversation, a deeper one, one that only their eyes understood. Then came the day everything almost slipped. A moment when Tom said something too personal, something that didn't belong in polite company, something that wasn't planned. Mary froze for just a second, not because she was offended, but because she understood it instantly. There it was again, honesty breaking through control, and instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. Emotionally, quietly, carefully. That was the danger, because once distance begins to disappear, it becomes impossible to rebuild it the same way. Tom realized it too late. He tried to pull back after that moment, to reestablish boundaries, to act as if nothing had changed, but Mary could feel the resistance in him, and it confused her more than anything else, because if it meant nothing, why did it feel like everything? Meanwhile, outside their small world, expectations continued as if nothing unusual was happening. Society still had its rules, families still had their assumptions, plans still moved forward, but inside Mary's mind, everything was becoming unclear. She started questioning what she had always accepted as her future: a quiet life, a predictable role, a path already written for her before she ever had a choice. And now, for the first time, that path felt too small, because somewhere in between conversations and glances, Tom had become part of a different possibility. A possibility she didn't yet dare to name. Tom, however, was not free from pressure either. There were expectations placed on him that Mary did not fully understand yet. Responsibilities, decisions, obligations tied to his name, his position, and a future that had already been partially decided without him. And that was the real conflict, because what was growing between them didn't fit into either of their lives. It didn't follow rules, it didn't respect timing, and it didn't ask permission. It simply existed, quietly, persistently, irresistibly. Then came another turning point, a moment neither of them planned for, a conversation that started casually but slowly drifted into something deeper, something honest enough to feel dangerous. Tom almost revealed too much. Mary almost asked too much. And for a brief second, it felt like everything might finally be said out loud. But just before that line was crossed, something interrupted the moment. Something that reminded them both that consequences always exist. And just like that, the space between them returned. But it was no longer empty. It was charged, because now they both knew what was at stake, even if they still refused to admit it. And Tom began making a choice, quietly, carefully, that Mary would never immediately understand. A choice that would not just affect their connection, but completely redefine what she believed about him. But what exactly was Tom preparing to sacrifice? And why did it feel like Mary was already part of that decision without even knowing it? After that fragile closeness, Tom began to change. Not in a way Mary could immediately explain, but in a way she could definitely feel. He was still present, still polite, still the same on the surface. But something inside him had shifted. There were moments he would go quiet mid-conversation, moments he would leave without explanation, moments where his attention felt far away, as if part of him was already somewhere else. And Mary noticed every single detail. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was nothing serious, just responsibility, just duty, just the life he had to live outside of her small world. But the pattern kept repeating, and patterns never lie. Tom's absence began to feel heavier than his presence, because when he was there, there was tension. But when he was gone, there was uncertainty, and uncertainty is far more painful. Mary started asking questions indirectly, carefully, almost as if she was afraid of the answers she might receive. But Tom never fully answered them. Instead, he redirected, he softened the truth, he avoided details, he spoke in half explanations that only created more confusion, and that was the beginning of the distance forming between them again. But this time, it wasn't emotional distance, it was secrecy. Tom was hiding something, and Mary could feel it growing. What she didn't know was that Tom was now standing between two lives. One life was the one everyone expected from him. Structured, responsible, tied to obligations he could not easily escape. And the other life was the one that had quietly formed around Mary. A life he never planned for. A life he didn't know how to choose without destroying something else. So instead of choosing, he delayed. And in that delay, everything became more complicated. Mary, unaware of the full truth, began to interpret his silence in her own way. She started to believe she had misread everything, that perhaps she had imagined the connection, that perhaps Tom's kindness was nothing more than politeness mistaken for something deeper. That thought hurt more than she expected because once doubt enters emotion, it spreads quickly. Still, she didn't confront him directly. Instead, she observed, and what she saw only made things worse. Tom wasn't distant because he stopped caring. He was distant because he cared too much, but Mary couldn't see that yet. Then came the disappearance. Without warning, Tom was simply not there. No explanation, no message, no clear reason, just absence. And that absence created space for something dangerous to grow inside Mary's mind. Questions turned into assumptions, assumptions turned into fear, and fear turned into emotional withdrawal. She told herself to move on, to stop thinking about it, to return to the version of life she understood. But her thoughts kept going back to him, to his voice, to his hesitation, to the way he looked at her like she mattered more than he was allowed to admit. Meanwhile, Tom was facing something completely different, a situation he could not avoid any longer. A decision had been forced upon him, one that involved responsibility, inheritance, and expectations that carried real consequences. And in that moment, Mary stopped being just a feeling in his life. She became a risk he could either protect or lose forever. But protecting her might mean destroying the future he was already tied to. And that is where the real conflict began. Because for the first time, Tom was not choosing between right and wrong. He was choosing between duty and love. And both choices would cost him something irreversible. So he made a decision he did not fully explain, a decision that required distance, a decision that looked like abandonment, but wasn't, at least not to him. But Mary didn't know that. All she saw was silence. And silence without truth always feels like rejection. When Tom finally begins to return, nothing is the same anymore. Mary is no longer waiting in the same emotional place she was before, and Tom is no longer sure if what he is returning to can even be repaired, because the truth he has been hiding is finally close to being revealed. And once it comes out, it won't just explain his disappearance, it will completely change how Mary sees everything they ever shared. But what exactly did Tom sacrifice in silence, and why does it feel like Mary was never meant to know the full truth at all? When Tom finally returns, it doesn't feel like a reunion. It feels like confrontation without words. Mary doesn't rush toward him. She doesn't smile. She doesn't ask the questions she has been holding in her chest for days. Instead, she simply looks at him like she is trying to decide whether he is real or just another disappointment. And that silence between them is heavier than anything they have ever said. Tom notices it immediately, because Mary is different now. There is distance in her eyes, not anger, but something worse. Disappointment that has already settled in. Tom tries to speak normally at first, carefully chosen words, controlled tone, as if he can rebuild everything by acting like nothing has changed. But Mary doesn't let him. Not this time. She asks him the question she has been avoiding since the moment he disappeared, why he left without a word, and Tom freezes, because the answer is not simple, not clean, not easy to explain without breaking everything open. For a moment, he tries to stay vague again, the same pattern, the same avoidance, the same half-truths. But Mary is no longer in the same place emotionally. She doesn't accept silence anymore. So he finally says it. Not everything, but enough. He tells her there were responsibilities, legal matters, family expectations, a future already written around him without his permission, and in that future, there was no clear place for her. Mary hears every word, but what hurts most is not the situation. It is the fact that she was never told. Tom made decisions for both of them without asking her what she wanted, and that realization changes everything, because Love without honesty starts to feel like control. Mary steps back emotionally in that moment, not because she stopped caring, but because she refuses to be chosen last in someone else's conflict. Tom sees it happening in real time, and for the first time, he understands the cost of his silence. But it might already be too late to fix it, because what he thought was protection, Mary now sees as exclusion, and between them, something fragile finally starts to crack. But before either of them can fully process what this means, another truth surfaces, one Tom never planned to reveal yet, a connection between his decisions and Mary's life that makes everything even more complicated than before, and suddenly Mary is forced to question something even deeper. Was any of this ever truly accidental, or was she part of his story long before she ever realized it? And when Mary finally learns what Tom has been hiding at the center of everything, will she still see him as the same person she once trusted? After everything falls apart between them, there is a strange quiet, not peaceful, but unfinished. Mary avoids Tom, not out of hate, but out of emotional exhaustion. Every time she sees him, she feels the weight of everything that was said and everything that was not. Tom, on the other hand, is no longer able to hide behind silence because silence has already cost him too much. He realizes that every attempt to protect Mary without her knowledge only pushed her further away. Every decision made alone created more distance instead of safety. And now, there is only one thing left he hasn't done. Tell her everything. Completely, no filters, no avoidance, no careful wording, just truth. When he finally speaks to her again, there is no performance left in him. He admits it clearly: the disappearance, the responsibility, the pressure from his world, the expectations he was bound to, and the impossible position he thought he was in. But then he says something he has never said before. He tells her she was never just a complication. She was the only thing that ever felt real. Mary listens, but she doesn't interrupt. Not because she agrees, but because she is finally hearing everything at once. Tom confesses that he was afraid of choosing wrong, afraid of losing everything, afraid that wanting her would destroy both of their lives. But in trying to avoid loss, he created it, and that is the truth he can no longer escape. Mary finally speaks, not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly. She tells him the most painful part was not the situation itself, but being left out of it, being made invisible in a decision that affected her life too. And Tom understands that now, fully. There is no argument left, only realization. Then comes the moment neither of them can avoid. Tom doesn't ask her to forget the past, he asks her to decide the future, not based on fear, not based on timing, but based on what is real between them. Mary hesitates, because this is no longer about feelings alone. It is about trust that has already been broken once. But when she looks at him, she sees something different now. Not perfection, not certainty, just honesty. And for the first time, that is enough. She finally lets go of the doubt she has been holding on to, not because everything was perfect, but because truth has finally replaced silence. And in that fragile moment, she makes her choice. Not because she was convinced, but because she finally feels included in her own story again. Tom hears her answer. And everything he feared losing becomes real in a completely different way. Not loss, but possibility. And just when it seems like their story is finally settling into peace, like one final revelation arrives, like something that ties everything together in a way neither of them expected, because the truth behind their connection goes deeper than either of them ever realized, and what happens next will redefine everything they thought was over. After that fragile closeness, Tom began to change, not in a way Mary could immediately explain, but in a way she could definitely feel. He was still present, still polite, still the same on the surface. But something inside him had shifted. There were moments he would go quiet mid-conversation, moments he would leave without explanation, moments where his attention felt far away, as if part of him was already somewhere else. And Mary noticed every single detail. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was nothing serious, just responsibility, just duty, just the life he had to live outside of her small world. But the pattern kept repeating, and patterns never lie. Tom's absence began to feel heavier than his presence, because when he was there, there was tension. But when he was gone, there was uncertainty, and uncertainty is far more painful. Mary started asking questions indirectly, carefully, almost as if she was afraid of the answers she might receive. But Tom never fully answered them. Instead, he redirected, he softened the truth, he avoided details, he spoke in half explanations that only created more confusion, and that was the beginning of the distance forming between them again. But this time, it wasn't emotional distance, it was secrecy. Tom was hiding something, and Mary could feel it growing. What she didn't know was that Tom was now standing between two lives. One life was the one everyone expected from him. Structured, responsible, tied to obligations he could not easily escape. And the other life was the one that had quietly formed around Mary. A life he never planned for. A life he didn't know how to choose without destroying something else. So instead of choosing, he delayed. And in that delay, everything became more complicated.